At its peak, it was valued at $47 billion, one of the most valuable startups the United States had ever produced. It was celebrated as the future of work, a company that promised to elevate the world's consciousness. But underneath the mission statements, WeWork signed long leases on office buildings and rented the desks out by the month. It was a real estate business, dressed with extraordinary skill in the costume of a technology company. Money poured in. It expanded into hundreds of buildings across dozens of cities. Its founder was treated as a visionary, its mission spoken of as a movement. For a few dazzling years, it seemed unstoppable. And underneath the mood lighting, the business it was actually running was old, ordinary, and risky, and that costume was worth tens of billions of dollars. Then the company tried to do the one thing that eventually forces every private giant to tell the whole truth. It tried to go public. And to go public by law, you must open your books to the entire world. Within weeks of doing so, the $47 billion story collapsed, not because a factory burned, not because a crime was proven, because none was, but because, for the first time, everyone could finally see the gap between the story and the numbers. This is the story of a company undone by sunlight. To understand the fall, you have to understand the trick at the center of it, and it was not an illegal trick, but a trick of framing of language of what a company chooses to call itself. On paper, the business was simple. Take on a long-term obligation, a 15-year lease on a building promising to pay rent for a very long time. Then turn around and sell that space in small, short-term pieces, a desk for a month, an office for a few. The company was, in essence, a middleman between landlords and workers. That model has a well-known danger built into it, and it is worth stating plainly. The company's costs were long and fixed. Those leases had to be paid for years in good times and bad. But its income was short and cancelable. A customer could leave in a month. When the economy is booming, the desks fill and the arbitrage works. When it slows, the customers vanish while the long leases remain, relentless and enormous. It is a business that makes money in fair weather and can hemorrhage it in a storm. This is not a secret. It is the oldest vulnerability in real estate. So why was it valued not like a real estate company, but like a soaring technology platform? Because that is what it insisted it was. It described itself not as an office rental business, but as a technology-driven community, a physical social network, a company selling not square footage, but belonging and connection. The mission was grand and deliberately vague. And that framing was not just marketing. It was the entire financial argument, because it changed the number at the end. Here is why that matters more than anything else in the story. A real estate company is valued modestly, on the solid, unglamorous math of its buildings and its cash flow. A technology platform is valued on dreams, on growth, on the promise of a future so large that today's losses do not matter. The very same business, with the very same buildings, is worth a few $billions if you call it real estate, and tens of billions if the world agrees to call it technology. The label was the fortune, and for years the world agreed to the label. That agreement was the foundation the entire empire stood on. Not the buildings, not the desks, not even the revenue, but a shared belief that this was a new kind of company that deserved a new kind of valuation. Belief is a powerful foundation, and while it holds, it can lift a company to staggering heights. But belief has one fatal property that concrete does not. It can vanish in an instant, the moment enough people simply stop believing. For years, though, the belief only grew, and it grew because it was fed by an enormous river of money. One backer above all others poured billions into the company, again and again, each investment at a higher valuation than the last. Every fresh injection of cash was treated as proof. If the smart money kept paying more, the company must be worth more. The valuation climbed and climbed, past 10 billion, past 20, past 30, until it reached $47 billion, a figure that placed it among the most valuable private companies in the country. The strange engine of it all was that losing money seemed only to make the story stronger. The company spent ferociously, opening locations at breakneck speed, planting its flag in city after city around the world. Each new opening was more evidence of unstoppable growth, and growth was the whole thesis. In the logic of the moment, the losses were not a warning. They were an investment in dominance, the necessary cost of conquering the future of work before anyone else could. The faster it burned, the more visionary it looked. It helped, too, that the whole era seemed to agree with this logic. Money was cheap and plentiful, and investors were hungry for the next company that might grow into something world-changing. A whole generation of so-called unicorns, private companies worth more than $1 billion, had trained the market to reward scale over profit and vision over caution. In that climate, a founder who burned cash to grow was not reckless. He was playing the game exactly as the game was being scored. The company was not an anomaly. It was the purest, most extreme expression of an entire moment's appetite for a good story told at enormous scale. At the center stood the founder, whose charisma and conviction were, by every account, extraordinary. He spoke of the company in the language of world-changing purpose, of consciousness and community and elevating humanity itself. That vision attracted talent, attracted capital, and attracted headlines. And it is important to be precise and fair here. Building a bold, money-losing growth company is not a crime, and telling an inspiring story about your mission is what nearly every founder does. There was nothing illegal in dreaming big. The danger was of a different kind. The danger was that all of this, the valuation, the expansion, the belief, had never once been tested against the full, cold light of public scrutiny. The company was private. Its real numbers were seen only by a small circle of insiders and backers who very much wanted the story to be true. As long as it stayed private, the gap between the narrative and the ledger could remain comfortably in the shadows, and everyone who mattered had every incentive to keep it there. And then the company reached for the prize that would also become its undoing. It decided to go public. Going public is the dream of most startups, the moment of validation, of liquidity, of a fortune made real. But it carries a price that has nothing to do with money. To sell shares to the public, a company must file a prospectus, a formal document that lays its finances, its risks, and its inner workings bare for anyone on earth to read. It is, by design, a legally enforced act of honesty. For the first time, the company would have to write down exactly what it was. In the late summer of 2019, it did. And the document was, for the story, catastrophic. There in plain print were the losses, not modest, but staggering, running into the billions. There, too, were the details the mission language had obscured. A business far more fragile and far more conventional than advertised, and a tangle of governance arrangements around the founder that alarmed the very investors the company needed to court, including dealings between the founder and the company itself, and a structure that concentrated extraordinary control in his hands. None of it was hidden anymore. All of it was simply there, on the page, for everyone to read at once. The reaction was swift and merciless. The professional investors who would have to buy the shares looked at the real numbers, compared them to the $47 billion story, and refused. The proposed valuation collapsed in a matter of days, cut not by a little but by tens of billions of dollars, as the market rendered its verdict on the gap between what the company said it was and what its own filing showed it to be. The dream valuation and the disclosed reality could not exist in the same room, and reality won. This is the exact hinge of the entire story, and it deserves to be named clearly. Nothing about the business had changed in those weeks. The same buildings, the same desks, the same leases, the same customers. The company was physically identical to what it had been the month before. What changed was that the numbers had finally been shown. The $47 billion had never been built on the buildings. It had been built on a belief, and the prospectus quietly, lawfully destroyed the belief. What followed was a collapse measured in weeks. With the market's rejection undeniable, the public offering was shelved, and then pulled entirely. Days later, on the 24th of September, 2019, the founder resigned as chief executive. The visionary who had personified the company was gone, and the mission language went quiet almost overnight. The mood that had lifted the company to $47 billion curdled in the space of a single autumn into something closer to disbelief, that anyone had believed it at all. The company was now in genuine danger of running out of money, its long leases still demanding to be paid while its access to new capital evaporated. Its largest backer, having already sunk billions into the story, faced a brutal choice. Let it fail and lose everything, or pour in still more to save what remained. It chose to rescue the company, injecting fresh equity, offering to buy up shares, and extending billions in loans, taking control in the process. It was less a triumph than a bid to salvage value from a wreck. In the years that followed, that backer's cumulative losses on the company would reach an estimated $16 billion. And here lies one of the most uncomfortable details of the whole affair. As the company reeled and ordinary employees faced deep uncertainty, the departing founder left with a reported exit package valued at around $1.7 billion. No court ever found that he committed a crime. He was never charged with one, and he would go on to start another company. But the arithmetic of the outcome is hard to look away from. The backers lost billions. Many employees lost their footing. And the man most associated with the story walked away, by report, a billionaire. The risk and the reward had come to rest in very different places. The company itself did not vanish, but its glory did. Stripped of its myth, it limped forward as a much smaller, more sober business. It eventually did reach the public markets years later at a small fraction of its former valuation. And then in November of 2023, it filed for bankruptcy protection. Its stock, once the emblem of a $47 billion future, traded at around 84 cents, valuing the entire company at roughly $44 million, a rounding error beside the number it had once so confidently claimed. It is worth saying clearly what this was and was not. It was a bankruptcy and a restructuring. The company reorganized and continues to operate today under new ownership and new leadership. It was not a criminal case. No one was convicted of anything. This was not a story of proven fraud, but of something quieter and in its way more common, a valuation built on a story that the cold arithmetic of a public filing could not support. The lesson at the heart of this collapse is not about office space, and it is not even really about one charismatic founder. It is about the difference between a story and a number, and about the strange, underappreciated power of being forced to tell the truth. A private company, funded by believers, can sustain almost any narrative it likes, because the only people allowed to see the real books are people who want the narrative to be true. The story and the numbers never have to meet. That is the shadow in which enormous valuations can quietly grow. An initial public offering is what drags that story into the light. It is, at its core, a legal requirement to show everyone, skeptics included, exactly what you are. And that is why this company's fall is so instructive. Its $47 billion was not destroyed by a competitor or a recession or a crime. It was destroyed by disclosure, by the simple, lawful act of finally writing the real numbers down in a document that anyone could read. The moment the story had to face the ledger in public, the story lost, and it lost almost instantly. There is a second warning folded inside the first, and it is worth carrying into any future you invest in or work for. Be wary of a company that insists, loudly and repeatedly, that it is a fundamentally different kind of company than it plainly appears to be, a real estate business that calls itself a technology platform, an ordinary operation that calls itself a movement. Sometimes that reframing is genuine vision, but very often, the relabeling is precisely where the overvaluation hides, because the new label justifies a number the old business never could. And there is a final, human note that this story leaves behind. When a valuation built on belief finally collapses, the losses do not fall evenly. The largest backers had the resources to absorb billions in losses. The founder, by every report, left extraordinarily wealthy. It was the employees, the smaller stakeholders, the ones who had believed the mission most and controlled it least, who bore the sharpest edge of the fall. A story worth $47 billion is a wonderful thing to own on the way up. On the way down, it turns out, it was never really worth anything at all, and the people who could least afford it were the ones still holding it when the sunlight arrived. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It describes a corporate bankruptcy, a failed public offering, and a series of lawful business and governance events, based on publicly available filings and reporting from credentialed sources. It makes no allegation of criminal wrongdoing by any individual or company. No one described here was charged with or convicted of any crime. Source links are provided above.